Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Sharon Harrell, Community Engagement Manager at the DIA. Thank you for tuning in to this exciting lecture followed by an audience Q&A. Please remember to add your questions in the chat located to your right. So let me give you a little introduction. In conjunction with Black History Month, the DIA is pleased to present tonight's program with photographer and filmmaker Tyler Mitchell. Tyler was raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and now lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He has a BFA from New York University Tisch School of the Arts. His work has been shown in solo exhibitions at Phone Photography Museum in Amsterdam, as well as the International Center of Photography, New York. He has also been included in group exhibitions at the Aperture Foundation in New York City and Red Hook Labs in Brooklyn, New York. He has lectured at a number of institutions on the politics of image making, including Harvard University, Paris Photo, and the International Center of Photography. Mitchell was also awarded the 2020 Gordon Parks Foundation Fellowship. At the DIA, Tyler's work is currently on view through April 17th, along with 14 other Black photographers in the exhibition, The New Black Vanguard, Photography Between Art and Fashion, which is organized by Aperture New York and curated by Antoine Sargent. The exhibition is made possible in part by Airbnb Magazine. At the Detroit Institute of Arts, major support is generously provided by Cadillac, with additional support provided by the MSU Federal Credit Union, the Desk Drawer Fund, and Maureen and Roy S. Roberts, Rhonda D. Welburn, and Bank of America. For his lecture this evening entitled Paradise Now, photographer and filmmaker Tyler Mitchell will discuss how his images of Black utopia give us access to create a utopia of our own. The lecture closes Black History Month and is generously supported by Aaron and Nancy Tellum, with additional support provided by TD Bank. Now, with no further ado, Paradise Now with Tyler Mitchell.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Detroit Institute of Arts, and thank you to everyone who's out there watching and wherever this might live digitally after we're done. Yes, my plan tonight is to speak for about 30 or 45 minutes about my images, my work, and what I do as an artist, and what is on view currently at the Detroit Institute with the new Black Vanguard exhibition. I'll start with something that I wrote about my body of work, I Can Make You Feel Good, which has been encapsulated as a book, as a monograph, and also as an exhibition, as Sharon introduced and talked about. I often think about what white fun looks like and this notion that Black people can't have the same. Growing up with Tumblr, I would often come across images of sensual, young, attractive white models running around, being free and having fun, the kind of stuff Larry Clark and Ryan McGinley would make. I seldom saw the same for Black people in images, or at least in the photography I knew of then. My work comes from a place of wanting to push back against this lacking. I feel an urgency to create a body of images where Black people are visualized as free, expressive, effortless, and sensitive. I aim to visualize what a Black utopia looks like or could look like. People say that utopia is never achievable, but I love photography's possibility of allowing me to dream and to make that dream become very real. In my work, I utilize the tools of documentary reportage, portraiture, fashion photography, art photography, and filmmaking. I view fashion as a space and opportunity to have clothes enhance my message about the Black body. I make very little distinction between my commissioned and my personal works, using them both as an opportunity to create this utopian universe. Whether that's photographing Beyonce, Spike Lee, skaters in Cuba, or my very close friends. Documented and real or fictitious and staged, My images are characterized by an interest in purity and in intimacy. In them, models recline, embrace each other closely, and peer into the lens, leaving evidence of a public display of affirmation in Blackness and a unifying visual text of hope. I also occasionally weave symbols into my portraits, such as water guns and plastic resin chains, symbols of repression, as a subtle reminder of the ways in which the Black body is still politicized and sometimes unable to move through the world as freely as I might like. I Can Make You Feel Good as a title is simply a declaration. It's one that I feel is gut punching in its optimism, and it feels important at a time like this to declare such a thing. So, this text that I wrote was written primarily on a plane, um, traveling from Atlanta to Amsterdam when I was invited by the Foam Museum to do a solo presentation there. I wrote it as I started to think pretty deeply about what is my work really doing. I'd known my journey up to this point, before getting invited by a museum to share my photographs, but what was going on underneath the pictures? I'll bring up a presentation and start to go through slides as I'm speaking. So, as I mentioned, my images are sort of characterized by this interest in an intimacy. Across my fashion work and across my personal work, models and friends have a closeness with the lens, as you can see here in this image. I'm just going to read a few other quotes also from the monograph. It is the picture of life contrasted with the fact of life, the ideal contrasted with the real, which makes criticism possible. Where there is no criticism, there is no progress, for the want of progress is not felt, where such want is not made visible by criticism. It is by looking upon this picture and upon that which enables us to point out the defects of the one and the perfections of the other. That's a quote by Frederick Douglass in Pictures in Progress. Um, I use that quote to sort of think about this larger idea of idyllic space, right, and utopian space in imagery. If we can go to the next slide. Portraits of actors. This here is the actor Ashton Sanders, who played the leading role in the film by Barry Jenkins, Moonlight. So there's also an underlayer of community going on in these images, or sort of backstory to who these people are, what they represent at a cultural moment specifically. Next slide. Images also of other movie stars, also from Barry Jenkins' film, this time If Beale Street Could Talk, uh, reimagining of James Baldwin's novel. But these two stars, Kiki Lane and Stephan James, this was an image created for Vogue magazine, but in it you see a sort of reference to the past, right? Perhaps Harlem, perhaps apartments in Harlem with the set decorations and the fashioning of these two young actors. Next slide, please. A Boy in Morocco. Again, travel has become a very essential part of my work, and I've felt very fortunate to be able to travel and make work in several continents now. When I'm doing this, I'm really interested in creating these very genuine connections with the people that I'm photographing. So this was a young boy named Yassine who we street casted in the town of Essaouira in Morocco as we were working and thinking about a sort of naturalism to fashion, rather than a sort of over glamorized idea of fashion. Next slide. And thinking about couture fashion, but in a sort of culturally specific Black context. This was a story I did for Vogue magazine in 2019, which explored the possibility of new casting, utilizing traditional couture clothing. I'm also going to read a little bit, although it may seem like I'm hopping around here. Hopefully all of these things will connect. I'm going to read a little bit of text from Deborah Willis. What is called the imagination, from image, magi, magic, magician, etc., is a practical vector from the soul. It stores all data and can be called on to solve all our problems. The imagination is the projection of ourselves, past our sense of ourselves as things. Imagination, or the image, is all possibility because from the image, the initial circumscribed energy, any use or idea is possible. And so begins that image's use in the world. Possibility is what moves us. That's a quote by Amiri Baraka. So by Deborah Willis. In 2018, the art and fashion world took notice of the, it's funny to read about myself in third person, but I think it is crucial to this lecture. In 2018, the art and fashion world took notice of the artful eye of Tyler Mitchell when he photographed Beyonce for Vogue September issue. This marked the first time a Black photographer was hired to shoot the cover image, 126 years after the appearance of Vogue's first issue. Currently based in Brooklyn, Mitchell is a skateboarder, filmmaker, video artist, and photographer. I first noticed the critical eye of Mitchell when he was an undergraduate student at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. I was fascinated with his work because I saw how deeply committed he was to understanding images and later changing existing visual narratives about being Black, male, creative, and young. Like a good number of contemporary Black photographers, Mitchell is locating the multivariate experiences of race and privilege, vernacular photography, and cultural traditions. In his image making, he explores the migrant experience, examines the spectacular and the complexity of the mundane, and at the same time explores the gestures of his muses. What is crucial about his work, as he redefines the making of a portrait, is his sense of scale and color. Absence was the key signifier for Mitchell in becoming a photographer and filmmaker. Next slide, please. Thank you. The lack of critical discussions on Black beauty, young Black males, the exchange of the gaze, the archive, and fashion prompted questions for Mitchell to explore in his work. And images on social media played a determining role in Mitchell's image making. Born in 1995, he grew up in a southern city in the United States, Atlanta, Georgia. He was not afraid to recognize and acknowledge beauty early on. As a young teenager, he purchased his first camera, a Canon digital SLR, with his savings. He was also inspired by Spike Jonze's early skate videos and taught himself how to make videos. Tumblr was also an expressive outlet for him. I started seeing pictures of beautiful youths, things that were being reblogged and shared. A lot of photographers that I saw were also interested in aesthetics, with some tie into youth culture, which connect to my interest in skateboarding. His work is unique, expressive, and original. The making of video for the Beyonce shoot, for example, focused on the performer wearing designer gowns, a contemporary imagined home environment, which was actually a dilapidated English country house, with children playing, sheets on a clothesline in a backyard, a lush green garden with trees. Next slide, please. I'll continue going through my work as I read this essay. Green garden with trees and music by Curtis Mayfield, The Makings of You, harkening back to the aesthetic of 1950s home movies. As reflected in the video, I consider his photographic style revolutionary because of his commitment to collaboration, which Mitchell ties to the tight-knit skateboarding community. Quote, "The thing that makes skaters like artists which runs deeper than being cool, is that it's not a sport that's built on competition. It's one that thrives on community." Mitchell provides the people he photographs the opportunity to build upon or expand on his ideas of imagining a moment. He considers place, space, race, gender, and dress. Mitchell's posing of Beyonce for the images in Vogue offers a compelling link to art historical references of the artist's model in salons in 18th and 19th century Paris, and the stylized photography studio portraits of Paris and New York in the 20th century. Mitchell challenges and introduces a dazzling new narrative about Black beauty and desire, while successfully broadening our appreciation of the history of painting, haute couture, and the proverbial domestic space of the clothesline. Ooh. Carrying on. Mitchell draws on a cross-section of art influences in his photographic sessions by creating highly stylized portraits, embracing themes of the past, and creating fictionalized moments of the imagined future. How the Black body has been imagined in the past is important to Mitchell. He takes photos of his friends, which include artists and designers, musicians and filmmakers, fashion models, and others who are self-fashioning through the lens of history and the present day. He redefines and transforms the reception of such imagery. What emerges is a revised and legible visual representation of the Black subject that emphasizes empowerment and play. This notion of play is central to Mitchell's work. because it allows not only his subjects to perform for the camera, but also for the viewer to imagine moments within the frame. A woman with blonde curly hair sitting in the middle of a road with her lace blouse hanging partly off her shoulder, or a woman in a seemingly torn pink dress that exposes her thigh as she rests her hand on top of her lace scarf adorned head, or a woman leaning against a pastel colored stucco wall wearing a sash across her yellow pleated dress. Next slide, please. Or a woman leaning against a the imagined narrative threatens to overshadow the composition of the image. Mitchell's photographs render a curious yet accessible narrative about the possibilities of play when, for example, one looks at images of a picnic where young men and women run, frolic, and sit on swings and blankets daydreaming. There is a sense of belonging reflected in these images. Next slide, please. Mitchell challenges conventional perspectives on identity and beauty. We see an affirmed confidence in the bold colors and styled shirts and dresses. His brown skin models wear colorful ribbons, white lace, pink mesh, and bows, flowing gowns with taffeta and cotton. Mitchell combines stripes and plaids with solid colors, hand painted dresses with capes, and floral wallpaper ruffles with polka dots. This experience recalls the impact that 20th century Malian photographer Seydou Keita had on his sitters. As Manthia Diawara explains, quote, "To go before Keita's lens is to pass the test of modernity, to be transformed as an urbane subject, even if one has no power in the market or at the train station." Uh, Mitchell's style is beyond the category of postmodern and post-new wave. He is, as writer-curator Antoine Sargent describes it, part of the new Black Vanguard. The new Black Vanguard's photography is rethinking how the fashion image can be less censorious and more reflective of real life. These images not only perform the traditional service of selling fantasies to attract customers, but also explore race, gender, and desire in new and productive ways, resulting in a reimagining of what constitutes a fashion image, widening the scope of representation and broadening the definitions of fantasy and power that are rooted in specific cultural contexts. The portraits fall under the banner of self-love and range in theme from Black lives have always mattered to joy. Mitchell's images are encoded with a new visual language of representation that broadens our understanding of desire for the consumer, viewer, and the artist's muse. He says that as a fashion photographer, he's thinking of conveying Black beauty as an act of justice. Mitchell is re-examining intimacy in studio portraiture by making environmental pictures that embody new stories through dress and pose. Next slide, please. The camera for Mitchell activates the projected dreams of his sitters. The image of three figures seated in front of a planted tree-lined wall, for example, implies land and ownership. His subjects appear carefree as they wear pastels, pinstripes, and white shoes or wrapped sandals. The photographs restage idealized moments of beauty that conjure futurity. Luxury is implied from images of two men, twins, wearing light-colored transparent shirts with beads lining their shaved hairlines, leaning against a wall draped with pink and yellow fabrics, of young men wearing t-shirts and gold chains, and a lambskin jacket, of two men wearing fur jackets and shorts and designer sneakers holding a basketball sitting on the hood of a white Mercedes, of a young woman in trendy sweaters and a large gold hoop earrings, and all carry meaning about cultural identity. As Mitchell himself has stated his intentions, I'm synthesizing what I see to be a full range of expression possible for young Black men and women in the future. This freedom of the rigid confines of prescribed masculinity manifests itself elsewhere in Mitchell's body of work, as he depicts Black boys in ways that they're rarely shown, enjoying the innocence of childhood or physical mutual affection. Mitchell's reimaginings through his fashion and portrait photography become a unifying visual text of hope, love, and justice. So I wanted to read that whole essay as a nice sort of way to not have to speak about myself, but also as a way to contextualize my journey and how I arrived at making these images. Next slide, please. And so we see here some of the fashion that Dr. Deb rather, who was my professor at NYU, is referencing. Next slide, please. We see, again, two models embrace their hair, the shapes of their hair sort of echoing one another, in sort of a fantastic contrast, and also sort of a powerful embrace of natural, Afro hair texture. Next slide, please. A young boy sort of in the field of Topanga, California, but I like that the space could allude to many, many places of the diaspora or on the African continent itself, right? This model, Yoel, who I photographed, I found out while photographing him that he's from Senegal. And so I was interested in making a depiction of, or an image that could hypothetically be made in California, but could also be made in his home, right, of Senegal. Next slide, please. Here we have the two boys with the two draped, the twin boys, Tori and Corey, with the twin draped fabrics behind them. Next slide. And that's the thank you. We'll stay on that image there as I read two more pieces of writing. Let's see. So this is by Miriam Koyman, the photography curator at Foam in Amsterdam, who was the very first curator I worked with on my very first solo presentation ever. Again, this show in particular, and the reason I'm reading this text is because being invited to do this show was really the impetus or the beginning of thinking about what was really going on underneath the work that I was making across commissioned and personal context. So here it goes. I Can Make You Feel Good is the promise filmmaker and photographer Tyler Mitchell made to the audience with his first exhibition survey presented at Foam Photography Museum, Amsterdam in April 2019. Whoever accepts his invitation, then or now, or with his book, enters a candy-colored visual realm in which young Black people appear in the lightness of nature or in front of idyllic studio backdrops, looking free, expressive, effortless, sensitive, and proud. The photographs by Tyler Mitchell might as well have been long encountered already by the audience in numerous fashion magazines, campaigns, or on social media. Displayed on a gallery wall, however, the same image is and is not the same. Shifting to a monumental scale, the photographs in I Can Make You Feel Good have left not only their original context of the manageable page, but also the shoots and series they have been a part of. Now viewed as single images, these photographs become like paintings. Proud portraits are interspersed with what seem like grand historical scenes. Roaming this picture gallery, two young men, twins in fact, in rather harlequinesque outfits, gaze melancholically at us, as if tired from their act. In another photograph, a girl licks a pink flower, as if trying to taste its color and scent. A portrait offers us a proud young man wearing a pink suit with black buttons and a purple scarf artistically wrapped around his neck. A hat like a night blue halo. Could we go to the image of the hat? Earlier in the PowerPoint. Yep, there we go. He looks like a distinguished painter, and it is as if he himself just finished the idyllic, painterly backdrop of his own picture. Next, we look up to a woman and a man dressed in orange safety clothing, carrying their twin babies in their arms. Behind them, a frayed flag flutters in the breeze of night, as if a depiction of victory after battle. Another scene shows a row of boys from behind. I'll show that image here. You can see. Standing shoulder to shoulder, bare-chested, all dressed only in jeans. One of the boys also wears a heavy silver chain necklace around his neck. He is turned towards us, but he is seemingly unaware of our gaze. Instead, he looks down to the belt of his jeans that he is tightening. If not history paintings, these grand tableaus do refer to histories engraved in the Black consciousness. Taking the implications in these life-size encounters into consideration, one starts to wonder who the artist's promise of the exhibition title is really addressed to. Central to the exhibition is a table. It is a mood board demonstrating a visual culture of Black representation throughout history and the history of art. In the Foam presentation, I included a vitrine full of my own personal research and images that sort of relate to the images I make. It expresses the artist's work process, and this is how he feeds himself, with inspiration and preparation for his fashion shoots and series, as well as the historical lineage his work draws from. Mitchell does not act alone. These pictures have been among us all the time, from the black and white photographs of early Hudnall Jr. to those of Dana Lichtenberg, the documentary photography work of Gordon Parks, and from a photograph from a fashion shoot by Harley Weir for Grace Wales Bonner to the reproduction of a painting by Kerry James Marshall. One portrait particularly stands out. It shows the distinct face of the most photographed man of the 19th century America, Frederick Douglass. Remembered as one of the foremost abolitionists and the preeminent Black leader of his century, Douglass ultimately understood photography as a powerful tool to rewrite racial prejudices in the United States. Very conscious of his pose, dress, and expression, with each portrait he presented America yet another image of Blackness that contradicted the prevailing racist stereotypes in images at the time. Entering another room, the viewer becomes either trapped or safeguarded by a high picket fence, depending on the emotional impact this allegory has on you. In this video installation called Idyllic Space, we are invited to recline in the grass and look up to a sky in which hypnotic depictions are projected of young Black people eating ice cream, bicycling in endless circles, playing tag, and more. The next room breaks the spell, however. In the video installation Chasing Pink Found Red, the camera pans over a group of young Black people relaxing in a park on a warm summer day. What makes us drop out of the dream are voices reaching us from the corners of this room. Voices expressing their experiences with racism and how idyllic moments that make up these video works have in fact been historically denied or discouraged amongst Black people. As Frederick Douglass wrote, from picture to picture, what we are confronted with here is the depiction of life contrasted with the fact of life. Woven into Mitchell's work is a quiet but direct reference to the 2014 killing of Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy who was shot by Cleveland police while playing outside with a toy pellet gun. A running thread through his display of works is the psyche of Black youth, that they should be careful about being too off guard in public for fear of persecution and even violence. The commentary we hear, crowdsourced by Mitchell from his followers on social media, family, and friends, is the critical undertone of reality echoing through this idyllic space. Are the delicate sleepers on their picnic blankets in Chasing Pink Found Red, in fact, dead? Tyler Mitchell describes his work as a Black utopia, but to think of it as utopian is to understand his work as an unrealistic ideal. So I read all that again to elaborate more on some of the ideas going on in these pictures here, which are included in the new Black Vanguard, but also in my work as a greater whole. And I absolutely do think that the exhibition stands as a sort of document of a certain time in which myself and my contemporaries are sort of thinking through these ideas of what is the future of a fashion image, right? And what is the future also of an art image? And what is the role of photography across these two different spaces, whether that be in magazine space, gallery space, or museum space. So this is where I think I will leave things off and open up to Q&A. If we can switch the slide to the image of Hijab Couture, the cover image of New Black Vanguard, that would be great. Okay, I'm seeing a few questions pop up. I don't know if I should read them out or if they'll pop up on the screen.
I can do that. So one of the first questions that came up was, when did your interest in photography begin, and how was it initially developed?
So yes, my interest in photography initially began with a camera that I borrowed really from a friend in Atlanta, Georgia. Around the age of 13 or 14, I basically picked up skateboarding and made or found a community of other skaters in Atlanta. And a good friend had a camera. There's sort of an art form to the whole filming and documenting of the sport of skateboarding. And so my friend had a camera and I simply borrowed it, and then from there became obsessed with the art of filming skateboarding, but also photography in general.
So kind of going off on that particular question, how did that transform into what you're doing now? That's a pretty
Yeah,
broad leap.
yeah, it is. So over time, I suppose in Atlanta, I continued this obsession with image making as it relates to skateboarding. There are people like Spike Jones, there are people like William Strobeck who have also done the same, right? Who have started from skateboarding and have sort of emerged as filmmakers or photographers themselves. But skateboarding and filmmaking became a portal really um, to where I am now because I sort of followed the yellow brick road to move to New York to go to film school based on my interest in filmmaking as a skateboarder, and then sort of expanded into photography once I got to school. I met Deborah Willis during my time at school and started to think more about the image as a tool for exploring ideas about my own identity and ideas about myself. So, yeah.
Okay, because I actually know I met Deborah Willis, so I know she can be a really great influence.
Yeah.
Um, there's a question by Ashley Givens. How involved are you in the styling of your models?
Yeah, good question. Definitely very involved. It's always a conversation, though. As you can see with the credits here in these images, they're stylists. And, the nice part about specifically fashion images and being able to work in that sort of a space right now for me is that it's these images become in conversation with the contemporary moment. These are clothes that have been designed by designers around the world, and they get to come into my universe in a very specific way. And so these stylists sort of see a mood board or see an idea that I have for how I want to make images, and then we just have a conversation. So I'm very involved. But it's nice because the clothes that they bring are very much of a seasonal contemporary moment.
Thank you. What about, we have a question from Pamela May, and she wants to know what was your motivation or your story behind your self-portrait in pink?
Oh, my self-portrait. That is a good question, and I don't have it anywhere available to show it, but there is a self-portrait I made of myself maybe 7 years ago now, that I believe she's asking about. But that was a self-portrait I simply made in my dorm, in my dorm room at NYU. And it sort of began my thinking around the motif of pink as it relates to brown skin, to Black identity, but it was also just a color I thought was nice behind me in a self-portrait.
So, which photographers, you mentioned Deborah Willis, but
Mhm.
what other photographers do you find inspiring?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but, I find, the first photographer that I sort of, came across and fell in love with the form of the photo book itself was Vivian Sassen, so I have to cite her as a big inspiration. I think the work that she makes, and especially was making when I encountered her books, when I first moved to New York, around 2014, was hugely new in terms of how I understood Black folks could be imaged in general. She was making very sort of sensitive and abstract work in Africa that I just really was drawn to. Also, of course, other greats like Wolfgang Tillmans, Dina Lawson. I mentioned a few earlier, Early Hudnall Jr., several contemporaries as well. Campbell Addy, who's also featured in the new Black Vanguard book and who is a friend. And the list goes on, Roy de Carava, but also, the images that inspire me, the nice part about sort of feeling very free form about sourcing inspiration from the internet, things kind of come from anywhere, right? And so they kind of come into my universe and get transported out into the work that I make. So it's a large, large list.
So, you've been photographing models and people all over the world.
Mm,
So, I'm trying to get an understanding as to what the experience is like photographing, doing your photographs in the US as compared to other parts of the world. Can you
yeah,
compare
that
and contrast?
absolutely. Yeah, that's an exciting question because yeah, getting to make work in several countries and climates and spaces and places has really always been still trying to think about my own personal experiences, where I'm from, and how, as a Black American, I exist in, for example, Europe or Africa or even Havana, Cuba. The first book that I made, actually, before this book, I Can Make You Feel Good, is a book of work I made in Havana, Cuba. So my start in photography, sort of as a formal photographer, it was a very informal book I printed. I self-published and printed only 200 copies, and it was very much like a budget project for myself. But that body of work was made in Havana, Cuba, and I sort of documented architecture there, which I was personally drawn to for the sort of mixture of pastel colors and sort of crumbling walls mixed with skaters that actually lived and were starting and forming a scene in Havana, Cuba. So these were things that I personally related to, but found in another place. So I think that when I'm making images in other cities, countries, places in the world, I'm often still thinking about personal and autobiographical experience. I'll say one more thing, which is that this image, which I pointed out before, um, is the title of the book, and it's called Boys of Walthamstow. Or it's from a series called Boys of Walthamstow, and the title actually is Boys of Walthamstow. This image, although it's made in Walthamstow, the marshes of Walthamstow, just outside London, England, this is an image that could have just as well been made in the South, in Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, you see the willow trees. And so I think I find environments that sort of make me think of home, or that remind me of a place I've been, or exist in an imagined space that remind me of the Black experience in general. So yeah.
So, Sweet Caroline 1313, she wants to know, outside of your editorial work, what are your favorite things or subjects to capture at this time?
No, I love that question. I mean, right now I've been photographing a lot of, again, the continued larger sort of Black creative community. I've been photographing photographers, I've been photographing artists, I've been really interested in photographing people with stories, as I have always have been. But even just recently did a project in my studio with a hair artist that I work with, and it was just a project that we wanted to do exploring hair, and we photographed basically a slew of our friends, whether they were models or whether they were musicians or whether they were my friends' family members. I'm always interested in weaving together like a web of connections through the people I photograph. So that's what excites me right now.
You know, you talked about hair in Detroit. There was a time when there were hair shows, you know?
Yep,
So did they have those in Atlanta?
they did. Yeah, they did have hair shows in Atlanta. I never attended any, but Jawara, the hair artist that I work with, has attended several in Baltimore, in Detroit, and in Atlanta. And um, I mean, the role that hair plays in a lot of my other images is huge, and I just think that, like, yeah, that's something I'm also having fun exploring. I would love to go to one eventually.
I don't think I ever went to one myself, but I know that there were pictures from maybe the 80s or so,
Yep.
and they have some really beautiful, and the whole environment around the hair shows was something to see.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And so, I think I lost the question that I had, but hold on, I'm going to get it back.
Yeah,
Um,
no worries.
just one second. So, until I find that, get back to that question, are there any other artists outside of the genre of photography that have motivated any of your work? Oh, I'm sorry, I got it back. The question I wanted to ask was, you are doing a lot of photographs that focus on youth.
Mhm.
Are you ever going to do anything, or would it be exciting to do something that's intergenerational?
Absolutely. I think that the project I most recently did, which opened at the Gordon Parks Foundation, which you mentioned, was sort of my first foray into like a very intergenerational project, because that was photographing specifically families in and around the New York area. Some that I had connection to, some that I was meeting for the first time upon sitting with them. But I was looking through generations of women and of men and within family. So I wish I had slides of that body of work, but it's on my website. And yeah, that entire exhibition was thinking through the act of looking towards the past, looking to the future, what the meaning of the vernacular family image is now in the 21st century. And I was sort of thinking about like, I guess I was thinking about how, living rooms, like black living rooms specifically, are sites where we stage family photographs, and it's sort of our own little mini galleries. So the work is very domestic oriented, but it's also intergenerational in the fact that I've photographed people, grandfathers with their grandsons, fathers with their daughters, siblings, mothers and daughters. So yeah.
And so I'm wondering, there's another question. Is it fun or difficult to photograph another photographer? Have you ever done
It's a good question. I actually don't know if I've done that. Um, I don't think I've ever done that. um, but I'd be excited to.
So the photograph that the woman mentioned earlier, that was a self photo portrait, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
has anyone photographed you, another photographer photographed you?
No, honestly, no.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
an interesting thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's not because I haven't wanted that, it just hasn't happened yet.
And so you talk about Black utopia, and that's very different from Afrofuturism. And
Mm,
so is there an interest in doing any work that kind of speaks to that? Because that's a trend, um, I guess, right now.
um, yeah, I mean, I believe that, I'm not too versed in the exact definition of Afrofuturism. I'm sure we could look it up. I haven't personally, like, used that term in relationship to my work. Oh, I have it here. The beauty of the internet is a cultural aesthetic. Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic, a philosophy of science, and a philosophy of history that explores the developing intersection of African diaspora culture with technology. Which is interesting to think about in sort of contrast or comparison to my work, because I think my work is very much thinking about Black folks in relationship to not to actually the opposite of technology, to sort of to land and to sort of landscape and to sort of the outdoors. So it's sort of thinking more through like a pastoral, historical and contemporary relationships to like the pastoral in a way. Yeah.
I kind of love that idea because, personally, I'm kind of getting into the Afro minimalism that's going
Mm,
on. There's a trend for that, and there's a book out regarding that. And so I like the fact that you are kind of taking technology out of your work and
mm,
showing something that's very um, in the present as well,
yeah,
and it's different from the narratives that we normally get
definitely,
of blackness.
definitely. I appreciate that.
And so I think there are a few more questions here. Let me get back. Um, so it seemed as if there were four more questions. Okay, so do you feel your age, youth, has been a positive attribute or hindrance to your career? Please elaborate.
Um,
Rochelle Hurt.
I mean, I think my age is a fact, you know? I think it's a matter of fact, and I think that, I'm more concerned with other things and going on in my work. And, as far as my career, I've felt very fortunate to have the career I have, so I'm just focused on sustaining that and making new ideas really is where my focus is. So yeah.
And Raymar asked, do you have any advice on making your own way into spaces that lack Black perspective and voices, magazines, publications, galleries, etc.?
Advice, I mean, I think the greatest advice, which I think is, a huge conversation going on right now, is how to find resources to sort of make and elevate your own spaces in a way, which I definitely am a huge proponent of. I see a lot of communities sort of coming together. Um, Even a recent magazine called Black Fashion Fair, which is sort of for a sort of Black fashion oriented community and by a Black fashion oriented community. And but as an artist myself, I would say that like the biggest thing is sort of collaboration. The biggest thing is dialogue with other artists, whether that's just people that you find on the internet that make things that you like, whether that's friends that are immediately near you in your town or your city you live in. I mean, community is what starts to get you on your way to making your way into the spaces that you want to be in, if that makes sense.
It does. You spoke a lot about the your friends um, being a part of your photography. How has can you talk about family support
Hmm.
in how that played out for you? Because some artists don't always get the support from family and friends, and you seem to have gotten that. So, can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel very fortunate and lucky to have had that certain support. I mean, I think for sure coming from Atlanta, making certain decisions, it wasn't always supported in a way. I think just the sheer act of taking up skateboarding was sort of looked at a little bit sideways by people in the South. I mean, especially if you think about then, skateboarding is sort of a ubiquitously understood sport and subculture now, but in 2009, 2010 certainly wasn't. And so I think there's been a growth of support now, but I think it's just been about more so believing in your own ideas, even from the very beginning, and accepting the support that comes your way from whichever angle, with a certain graciousness. I think my family in particular were always very trusting, but we're always questioning, how was I going to sort of make a way in this profession and in this industry. So, and in this, and also in as an artist. So, it's always an up and down roller coaster of that sort of thing. Yeah.
And there is, I believe it's I live, learn, and love. What would you share with the youth who are interested in art, and how would they get started in sharing their own story through photos?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I would share with those interested in art that the interest starts today, and the practice of making art starts tomorrow. I think that like the beautiful thing about photos right now is that they're highly democratized. We all have, or most of us, and hopefully we all have access to an image making tool, whether that be a phone, or any sort of rudimentary camera. Hopefully, this is something that, like, I mean, just the accessibility for high quality picture making tools has become greatly widened in the past 5, 10 years. So I would just encourage, I would basically encourage the story of making photos and sharing personal experience to start like right now, with what's in front of you.
Thanks. And so Ray Peck has an interesting question. He says photography was considered art relatively recently. How do you feel about publishing a book about such a recent art form? Emmy Peck.
Um, yeah, this is a good question as well. Photography in a certain sense does still, we still have to fight for our place. We still are considered almost like the little cousin of the art world or something. That painting is sort of at the top, and then it trickles all the way down, and at the bottom is photography because, you know, um, there are many questions of truth, of objectivity, of documentation versus sort of skill, so to speak, or sort of skill set. And this is a huge question, an uphill battle that I'm constantly, a part of the fight to insist that these images are worth looking at, that the particular body of works that I'm crafting are, pertinent to the contemporary moment, but also eye-opening for the times in which we live. So this is a huge struggle that I'm dealing with right now, you know. And I think the biggest step forward in that is to publish books. Publishing books allows people to have these objects and these thoughts and these words that I've just read for everyone, on their coffee tables for all time. So Yeah, that's precisely why I publish books.
Can you talk a little bit about the direction you're going in film? What's your next film that you're thinking about?
Um, Good question. um, I we'll find out. I don't know what I can say about it yet, other than it's very, very early stages.
And so we're almost hitting towards the end of our time. I'm not really seeing any additional questions. Do you have any kind of final statements you want to make about the work that you're doing, where you're going next, um, any kind of other genres of art you're considering uh, tapping into?
Sure. I mean, the goal is organic and sort of sensical growth. So the goal is sort of to expand. I think I've been interested even in an installation I did in at my show at ICP in early 2020 was sort of a laundry line-esque installation down a 60-foot hallway in which I printed photographs onto an arrangement of fabrics and textiles. I think like bringing what excites me is bringing photography closer to sculpture, and also what excites me is making film and video work, as somebody asked, um, that can exist in both gallery and theatrical spaces. So I'm excited to expand into new mediums, but I'm also sort of just chugging along, thinking about new ideas and for images now and today. So yeah, I think that's it. But I also just want to end off on a thank you to you, Sharon, and a thank you to the Detroit Institute of Arts and to Nancy, who I understood couldn't be here, but and also to Antoine, who curated and put this book together. So in this exhibition. So thank you.
You're welcome. I do have one question from Julie Finn that I want to get into you. It just popped up. She says, I think the cover photo of the young woman in the pink burqa is one of the most beautiful and compelling photos I have seen. Can you speak of how it came to be and the meaning of it? And that's the last question.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to speak about it. So this model, Ugbad Abdi, who is a really great at this stage in her career supermodel, I would say, um, is actually a model who I photographed and did her very first editorial. She was a young model that I found, or that sort of was introduced to me through someone in fashion, and I immediately said I would love to photograph this person for a Vogue editorial I'm doing. And she is Somalian, I believe, from Iowa, and wears a hijab. That's part of her identity. And so I was interested in sort of the potential empowering of this symbol of her identity through the motif and the use of this like custom pink flower hijab. But this was also a part of that couture story that I mentioned before, um, in which we highlighted, a sort of new vanguard of casting in sort of contemporary couture clothing. So this image stands in that series, and yeah, that's how it sort of came about. Was thinking about a powerful reclaiming of this, or a powerful claiming rather of this um, beautiful symbol of the hijab. So yeah, and just
Well,
the defiant gaze as well that she has right into the camera, I think is really really nice.
it's striking. It is. I
Hmm.
did buy the book. As soon as it came out, I bought the book. So I've had that book for a little while. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, Antoine, and talking with us about the things that you're doing. And I'm looking forward to the things that are coming up next for you.
All right, thank you.
So, Joe and Antoine Sargent, the curator of the new Black Vanguard. Um, and Nancy for bringing it to the DIA. And I want to thank Wayne and Oakland counties for their continuous support in the museum. And make sure you check into the DIA's website at dia.org and check out all the exhibitions that are happening at the museum currently. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you.